The bell finally pierced the monotone, and the classroom erupted into a symphony of shrieks and locker slams. I, Kaylee, reveled in the controlled chaos. It had been my reality for the past 20 years, ever since I graduated with a teaching degree and a head full of idealism. My parents, bless their practical hearts, had urged me towards a stable career, accounting, maybe law. But the thought of spending my days hunched over numbers or arguing legalese sent shivers down my spine. "Ms. Evans! Ms. Evans!" A small hand tugged at my sleeve. I looked down to see Lily, a wisp of a girl with bright, curious eyes, bouncing on the balls of her feet. "Yes, Lily? Can I stay after school again today? I finished all my homework, and I really want to talk about that book you mentioned." A smile tugged at my lips. Lily was one of those rare students who devoured knowledge like candy. Most afternoons, she'd linger after class, peppering me with questions about everything from black holes to the intricacies of Shakespearean sonnets. "Sure, kiddo," I said, ruffling her hair. "But on one condition, we grab a healthy snack first. No heroics can happen on an empty stomach." She giggled, her smile infectious. "Deal." The school day ended with a chorus of goodbyes, and Lily bounced towards the front door, searching for her usual ride. Today, however, wasn't her mom waiting, but a man I hadn't seen before. Tall and broad-shouldered, he had a warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Hey, Lily," he boomed, crouching down to her level. "You ready to ditch this place?" Lily squealed with delight and launched herself into his arms. "Uncle Mark. This is Ms. Evans, my favorite teacher." Mark extended a hand towards me. "Mark Miller, nice to meet you. Lily talks about you all the time." His handshake was firm, his eyes holding mine for a beat longer than necessary. A blush crept up my neck, and I mumbled a greeting. "So, Ms. Evans," Mark continued, a playful glint in his eye. "You must be some kind of superhero to keep this little tornado focused all day." Lily giggled, and I found myself smiling back. "She's a bright one, that's for sure. A pleasure to have in class." Over the next few weeks, Mark became a regular fixture in the afternoon pickup routine. We'd chat briefly, the awkwardness slowly giving way to comfortable conversations. He was funny, intelligent, and talked about things beyond the usual kid-related topics. One afternoon, when Lily was engrossed in a book I'd loaned her, Mark lingered after the bell. "Listen, Ms. Evans." He started hesitantly. "I know this might seem crazy, but would you maybe like to grab coffee sometime? Not with Lily, of course. Just us." My heart skipped a beat. Sure," I stammered, surprised by how quickly the answer tumbled out. That coffee turned into dinner, then drinks, then stolen moments whenever our schedules allowed. We were falling fast, caught in a whirlwind of stolen glances and late-night texts. A year later, Mark slid a diamond ring onto my finger, his eyes mirroring the joy in mine. We married in a small ceremony, surrounded by close friends and family. My parents, initially hesitant about the whirlwind romance, were won over by Mark's easy charm. Life seemed perfect. I gained a loving husband, a kind and supportive mother-in-law, and a rambunctious niece, Lily, who spent most weekends at our place. Lily's mom, Mark's sister, Sarah, was another story entirely. With fiery red hair and a penchant for tight skirts, Sarah cut a figure of chaos. Most evenings, Mark would field frantic calls from her, usually ending with him rolling his eyes and muttering about another man crisis. Sarah, in turn, barely tolerated me. Every visit was punctuated by backhanded compliments about my boring life choices and envious jabs at our family. One night, after a particularly scathing remark about my old-fashioned values, I finally snapped. "Mark," I hissed after Sarah flounced out the door, "Lily needs more stability. Can't you see that woman wouldn't know responsibility if it bit her in the butt?" Mark scowled. "She's my sister." Frustration bubbled over. "And Lily's your niece. How long are you going to pretend it's all sunshine and rainbows? That girl needs a real parent, not a walking party trick. Mark stormed out, leaving me fuming in the living room. This wasn't the first time we'd argued about Sarah, and it wouldn't be the last. A small seed of worry had taken root in my mind, a worry that would soon blossom into a full-blown storm. A few months after the wedding bliss settled, it was time for the grown-up talk. We sat at the kitchen table, the remnants of takeout scattered around us. "Mark," I began, trying to keep my voice neutral, "we need to talk about finances." He sighed, pushing back his chair. "Finances? What's the deal, honey? We agreed on a shared account, remember? 50-50. It seems like you haven't been contributing much lately." My words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusation. Mark's brow furrowed. "Yeah, well, things came up. Sarah's going through a rough patch again. Needs some help with Lily and all." "Again?" My frustration simmered. "Mark, we can't keep bailing her out every other month. We have bills to pay, groceries to buy. Look, Sarah's family. I gotta help her out, alright?" His voice was laced with a defensive edge. "And what about our family?" I retorted, my voice rising a notch. "Isn't Lily our family too? You're basically paying for their meals with our money." Mark slammed his fist on the table, making me jump. "Don't you get it, Kaylee? They need it more than we do. You keep the damn house clean, that's your contribution. Stop nagging about every dime." The anger in his voice startled me. This wasn't the easygoing Mark I married. This was a man with a secret, and a growing resentment towards me. I swallowed the lump in my throat, refusing to be bullied. "That's not fair, Mark. We agreed on a system, and you're breaking it." He scoffed. "Life happens, honey. Deal with it." With that, he stormed out, leaving me alone in the cold silence of the kitchen. The takeout tasted like ash in my mouth. Mark's outburst confirmed the gnawing suspicion in my gut, something wasn't right with Sarah's rough patch. This wasn't a one-time thing, it was a pattern. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, a knot of worry tightening in my stomach. The next few months were a blur. Mark stopped contributing altogether. Every time I brought it up, he'd brush me off with a flimsy excuse or a snide remark. The bills started piling up. I dipped into my savings, then resorted to using my own salary to keep the house afloat. It felt like I was single-handedly supporting a family that wasn't even mine. The worst part? Mark didn't seem to care. He continued to spend his evenings, glued to his phone, taking calls from Sarah and disappearing, for hours on end. The man I loved, the man who promised a future together, was slowly becoming a stranger, his secrets creating a widening chasm between us. 6 months crawled by, each day a monotonous echo of the last. Mark's absences grew longer, his excuses flimsier. He'd vanish for entire evenings, his phone perpetually on silent. When he did grace us with his presence, it was a fleeting hello and a quick goodbye, his attention glued to his phone like a lifeline. Family dinners at my in-laws became a painful charade. Mark, a ghost at his own table, would mumble half-hearted greetings before disappearing into whispered phone conversations on the patio. My mother-in-law, bless her perceptive heart, would shoot me concerned glances, her silence speaking volumes. One night, after another empty silence settled over our dinner plates, I snapped. Mark, barely acknowledging my presence, shoved his food around the plate with a restless energy that made my skin crawl. "Mark," I said, my voice tight with frustration, "we need to talk." He glanced up, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "About what, honey?" "About you. About us. About where the hell you are all the time." The words tumbled out, a dam bursting after months of pent-up emotions. Mark sighed, a theatrical display of exasperation. "Look, I'm swamped at work. It's a demanding time, all right?" "Work?" I scoffed, disbelief burning in my throat. "You haven't worked a single late shift in months. What's really going on, Mark?" He pushed back from the table, his face hardening. This isn't up for discussion. You wouldn't understand. Try me, I challenged, my voice rising a notch. Because right now, all I understand is that you're a stranger living in my house. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark stared at me, his jaw clenched, then turned on his heel and stormed out. I sank back in my chair, the weight of his indifference crushing me. Days turned into weeks, and Mark's absences became permanent. He wouldn't answer my calls, his texts going unanswered. The silence in our once vibrant home echoed his disappearance. One morning, I woke up to an empty bed and a chilling realization: I was alone. Desperation clawed at my throat. Silence wasn't a solution, it was a suffocating abyss. I poured my heart out on the cold, digital canvas of an email. Words of frustration, of loneliness, of the life we promised ourselves slowly dripping onto the screen. I demanded answers, a reason for his constant disappearances, and a fair share of the financial burden. Hitting send felt like throwing a pebble into a bottomless pit, a tiny splash in the vast emptiness of our marriage. The silence stretched on, a cruel confirmation of my suspicions. No apology, no explanation, just a deafening void. But then, when the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in angry hues of orange and red, I found it. A single sheet of paper on the kitchen table, stark white against the worn wood. Divorce papers. Signed. By Mark. My breath hitched. The world tilted on its axis. I snatched the paper, the words blurring before my eyes. Anger, hotter than I'd ever known, surged through me. I slammed my phone on the table, dialing his number with trembling fingers. Ring, ring, voicemail. I left a blistering message, demanding a damn explanation. But the only reply was the sterile voice of his automated system. I dialed again, and again, a desperate hope clinging to the possibility of his voice. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a voice answered. But it wasn't Mark's. It was a young, flippant voice, dripping with an air of entitlement. "Who is this?" she drawled. "It's Kaylee," I choked out, my voice barely a whisper. "Mark's wife." A chilling laugh echoed through the receiver. "Wife? Honey, you're yesterday's news. Mark loves me, I'm his future now. So do yourself a favor and find somewhere else to live, okay?" The phone clattered from my numb fingers, landing with a dull thud on the counter. My world shattered into a million pieces, the cruel reality settling in my gut like a lead weight. Betrayal, raw and searing, burned through me. Tears streamed down my face as I stumbled out of the apartment, the divorce papers crumpled in my fist. I needed my mother-in-law, her unwavering strength, a beacon in the storm that had become my life. The drive to her house was a blur. When I finally reached the familiar porch, I practically pounded on the door. My mother-in-law opened it, her eyes widening at the sight of my tear-streaked face. Without a word, I collapsed into her arms, the dam breaking open. She held me tight, her soft murmurs a soothing balm on my wounded soul. As I sobbed the story of my shattered marriage, of Mark's lies and betrayal, a flicker of anger crossed her face. "Kaylee, you'll stay here, with us," she said, her voice firm. A hesitant nod escaped my lips. This wasn't what I'd envisioned, not the life I'd planned. But as I stepped inside, a small hand tugged at my coat. It was Lily, Mark's niece, her eyes filled with concern. "Auntie Kaylee? What's wrong?" she whimpered. I knelt down, pulling her into a hug. "It's okay, sweetie. Everything will be all right." As I held Lily close, a fierce protectiveness bloomed within me. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about building a new life, a life where trust and love weren't empty promises. It was about starting over, stronger and wiser. The journey ahead would be daunting, but I wouldn't face it alone. The taste of betrayal still lingered, a stale ash in my mouth. Picking up the pieces of my life wouldn't be easy, but I wouldn't crumble. My first stop was Brenda Miller's office, the legal arena's reigning gladiator. Her office oozed power, sharp suits, gleaming chrome, and a faint scent of expensive cigars. my gut churned with suspicion. This wasn't a case of late nights at the office. This was something deeper, something he desperately wanted to hide. Swallowing my pride, I marched into Brenda Miller's office, a steely resolve hardening my features. Brenda, a lawyer with a reputation as sharp as a stiletto heel, surveyed me coolly. Divorce, I stated, the word heavy on my tongue. And financial compensation. A flicker of interest sparked in Brenda's eyes. Intriguing, Kaylee. But accusations are like tissues, used and discarded. We need proof, concrete evidence to bury your husband and his little secret. That evidence came in the gruff form of Rex Matheson, a private investigator with a nose for trouble and a face like a well-worn map. A hefty wad of cash later, Rex was on the case. Days bled into weeks, the silence in the apartment punctuated only by the tick-tock of the clock. Then, one rainy evening, Rex materialized on my doorstep, a manila folder clutched in his hand like a shield. This, he rasped, his voice sandpaper on concrete, might be what you're looking for. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I flipped through the contents, transcripts, and audio recordings. Each word that spilled from the speakers was a fresh shard of betrayal. Sarah, my supposed sister-in-law, and her friends' voices filled the room, a sickening symphony of deceit. He's got a sweet job, Sarah. The friend's voice dripped with envy. He practically prints money. Exactly, Sarah cackled, the sound devoid of any warmth. That damn apartment, it should be mine. As soon as you marry Mark, we can convince him to sell it. Maybe I'll try to convince him of Lily's illness and her expensive treatment. We'll split the profits, just like we planned. My blood ran cold. Sarah, the leech, had been using Mark all along, and her friend, my husband's lover, played along with her in everything. Our comfortable apartment wasn't a home for her brother, it was a golden ticket to a life of luxury. Mark, the gullible fool, was nothing but a pawn in her twisted game. Armed with this explosive evidence, I returned to Brenda's office, a cold fury simmering beneath the surface. Brenda listened intently, a dangerous glint in her eyes as the recordings played. Bingo, Kaylee, she said, a slow smile spreading across her face. This is gold. Time to make those cheaters pay dearly. But my stomach churned with a bitter cocktail of anger and a strange, unexpected worry. Mark may have been a gullible fool, but Lily, his innocent niece, was caught in the crossfire of his sister's greed. I couldn't let her become another casualty in this mess. Instead of confronting Mark or Sarah directly, I decided to play a different game. I called my mother-in-law, my voice tight with urgency. Something big needs to happen, Rita, I said. I need everyone at the house, now. The following evening, a tense silence filled the air as we all sat around the dining table, me, Mark, his stony-faced mother and father, and Sarah, who sauntered in last, a reeking cloud of alcohol and bad attitude clinging to her like a cheap perfume. Before I could even utter a word, Sarah burst out. Can you believe this? Child Protective Services just barged into my place, accusing me of being an unfit mother. Lily's in some damn shelter now, the little ingrate. Disgust tightened my throat. This woman, who saw her own daughter as a mere pawn in her twisted game, now had the audacity to play the victim. Sarah continued to rant, oblivious to the storm brewing in my eyes. It was then, with a steely voice that surprised even myself, that I spoke. Actually, Sarah, I said, leaning forward, I contacted Child Protective Services. The room fell silent. Sarah's eyes widened, her drunken stupor momentarily forgotten. Mark gaped at me, his face a mask of confusion. You what? Sarah shrieked, her voice laced with a dangerous edge. Why you meddling? Because, Sarah. I cut her off, my voice unwavering. You are a terrible person. You used your own brother for money, and now you're willing to throw your own daughter under the bus to get what you want. Lily deserves better than that. Sarah lunged at me, a feral snarl contorting her face. Before she could connect, Mark, bless his slow-on-the-uptake self, finally reacted, grabbing her arms and holding her back. Get your hands off me! Sarah shrieked, flailing uselessly. You're both finished. You'll pay for this. Mark, still bewildered, finally spoke. What was all that about, Kaylee? I pressed play on the recorder, the damning conversation between her and her friend filling the room. Mark's face drained of color with each passing word. Shame and disbelief flickered in his eyes as he heard his sister's cruel assessment of him, a mere ATM to be manipulated. Sarah, cornered and desperate, erupted. This is bullshit, she shrieked, her voice laced with a barely concealed tremor. You have no right to stick your nose in our family business. This isn't your place. Ignoring her outburst, I kept my gaze fixed on Mark. This was his moment of truth, the moment he saw his sister for who she truly was, a scheming manipulator. Rita, my normally composed mother-in-law, joined the fray. Sarah, how could you? Her voice, usually laced with warmth, dripped with disappointment. This is betrayal of the worst kind. Sarah scoffed, a cruel twist of her lips, the only response. Betrayal? She sneered. Please, spare me the dramatics. This was always the plan. First, soften Mark up, then that fancy apartment becomes mine. And after that, she continued, her voice dripping with malice, it's your turn, old folks. Your retirement nest egg looks mighty comfortable. The revelation slammed into Rita and John like a physical blow. Their eyes widened in horror, their faces a mask of betrayal. As for Sarah, she continued her drunken tirade, a string of obscenities spewing from her lips like a malfunctioning faucet. It was a pathetic display, a stark contrast to the poised manipulator she'd pretended to be. Turning back to Mark, I met his gaze. Well, Mark, I said, my voice surprisingly calm, the evidence of your infidelity is clear. Now, let's talk about financial compensation. Mark opened his mouth, a plea for forgiveness hanging in the air. But before he could speak, I held up a hand, silencing him. There's nothing left to say, I said, my voice firm. You had your chance, Mark. Now, it's time for me to move on. The gavel slammed down, a final punctuation mark on a messy chapter. Divorce. Financial compensation secured. Justice, though bittersweet, had been served. Sarah and her conniving friend were convicted of attempted fraud, their dreams of a swanky apartment evaporating like cheap perfume. Lily, my ex-husband's niece, remained the biggest casualty. Custody battles ripped through the family court, and in the end, a bombshell dropped: Sarah's ex wasn't the biological father. The truth, like a stubborn weed, refused to stay buried. With no known father and an unfit mother, the judge placed Lily under Rita's care. Her once empty house transformed into a bustling haven. Rita, initially overwhelmed, found solace in raising Lily. We settled into an unlikely, but surprisingly functional, routine. One quiet evening, Lily, a tangle of blonde curls and boundless energy, snuggled onto my lap. Mother isn't coming back, is she? She asked, her voice small. A lump formed in my throat. No, honey, I said gently. But you're stuck with me now. A smile, as bright as a sunflower, bloomed on her face. Good, she declared, wrapping her arms around me. I love you more than glitter and ice cream combined. But the following events threw me into shock. It happened on an ordinary Friday evening. Rita and John, my ex-in-laws, sat across from me, their faces etched with a mixture of sadness and resolve. We changed the will, John stated bluntly, his voice gruff. The house, the savings, everything goes to you and Lily. My jaw dropped. But, why? I stammered, completely thrown off guard. Rita reached out and squeezed my hand, her eyes filled with a complicated mix of emotions. You opened our eyes, Kaylee, she said softly. We see Mark for who he truly is now, a spineless fool easily manipulated by his own sister. But what about Mark? I asked hesitantly. He's your son. John's face hardened. Blood doesn't mean everything, Sarah. He made his choices, now he has to live with them. Rita chimed in, her voice firm. You and Lily, you're the family we have left. You've been there for us, for Lily, and that's worth more than any blood tie. Life continued its steady march forward. The house, once echoing with emptiness, was now filled with Lily's infectious laughter and Rita's gentle guidance. We were an unlikely family, a hodgepodge of heartbreak and resilience, but it worked.